My name is Chris Adams. I'm the president of Balancing Act, and it's a pleasure to have everyone here. We're looking forward to working through our last session in our Sim Makers workshop. This is the first time we've done this format, and it's actually been both a lot of fun and I think really productive. With me today are my colleagues, Peter Diederich, who's our National Director of Sales, as well as Dan Ferguson, who is our Senior Software Engineer. If you have questions for any of us, use the questions pane, and you can also raise your hand, and we'll call on you if you want to use your voice, which is great. I realize people often don't want to speak on these things, but if you do, let me know and I'll unmute you, or you could pose a question using the question icon, and you should have a little control panel on the right side there. Once again, just briefly, these are the folks who are on this journey with us. A really nice collection of North American cities and counties and school districts and organizations. We're excited to have you all. The plan for today is we're going to kind of wrap things up. It's going to be a little bit less about the simulation and more about a tool called Taxpayer Receipt, as well as how you communicate the good work you're doing. And we're really happy today to have Harjo Sangha, who is the assistant to the city manager of the city of Morgan Hill, California, who's going to share with us a little bit about what they're doing. And as I said, kind of the format of this whole series is a workshop. And so we're trying to have a chance for people to check in sort of in process and as they're going forward. Last week, we got a really nice perspective from a couple of different cities that are working through this. Bellevue sort of shared kind of where they were in their process. They're just developing. Morgan Hill is just a little bit further along. I'm going to say about 4 or 5 weeks further along. They actually became clients a little bit before this series started. But they are off and running and sort of trying things out and seeing what works for their community and based on their goals. So Harjo, if you're on, I'm just going to turn it over to you to kind of share what you've got. And I'm going to pull up a copy of your simulation and you can guide me around if you wish.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. Harjo Sangha with the City of Morgan Hill. Super excited to be able to finally get on board with Balancing Act. So the approach that we're taking is we have a 2-year budget that we adopt, and we're currently in the budget development phase. So what we're hoping to use this tool is the city has identified unfunded needs for its general fund, and the purpose of this tool is to really illustrate where those needs are, what those dollar amounts are, and get the feedback from the community as far as what is a priority for them out of those needs. And further, we're trying to highlight that general funds core services such as public safety, which includes police and fire, under our infrastructure and parks and recreation. We have needs for our roadways and streets, much like other cities in California, and also trying to highlight the fact that there's a need across all the divisions that general fund currently funds. So moving dollars from one division to another doesn't really solve the underlying problem. What we're basically doing is, moving the challenge or the issue from one bucket to another. So we're hoping to really get that point across, as well as kind of highlight that, what are our revenue options on the revenue side. At least for us in Morgan Hill, property taxes in California are capped at that annually 2%. So there isn't much room for us in property tax unless we were to, do a parcel tax type of a deal. We have polling results that have illustrated historically in our community that the city has not favored any type of a parcel tax or assessment of that nature. So we're illustrating that this option really isn't feasible for us. But what is feasible for us is the next category, which is sales tax. Currently the city has about 0.25% capacity left under the state's authority, and that would generate about $2.5 million for us. So, we're really trying to have the community kind of play with the scenarios on those sides. For example, if you were to go up to the public safety and say they want a nominal funding increase in police services, our information kind of talks to each of those details, what that would mean. Nominal funding will hire one officer, marginal funding will hire 2 officers, or if it's a large funding, we'll hire 2 police officers and a full patrol team, and then you'll see the dollar impacts there. And then the key thing, to bring home here is that while there's a need, and if we were to load up all of those needs, there's no one revenue measure solution that could solve the city's problem. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And that's what we're trying to daylight to the community. And secondly, get some feedback on those unfunded needs and how the city would prioritize. Is it roads? Is it police? Is it fire? Is it parks? Things of that nature. We did do a demo with a smaller group last week, and I shared back some good feedback with Chris on this. And it was a leadership Morgan Hill, a small group of community members that are actively engaged. And they totally loved the tool and are excited for us to release the city manager's recommended budget and kind of, go from there. Other than that, I think it's been well received. Internally, staff have had some reservations. So you'll notice on this simulation, we have only illustrated increases to either increases to the divisions or areas, but no decreases theoretically. Mm-hmm. Internally, we're having a little bit of a challenge because everybody, of course, anytime you put up a simulation and you say you want to cut services, although our purpose is really for the community to be able to see the impact if they were to say decrease services in police. We want to be able to get that message across that it's not really feasible, but these are the issues that you may begin seeing if you were to cut a patrol team or a division. But internally, I think we're messaging that. We've been communicating with our staff that, just because it's on the simulation, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the recommended action and so forth. So that's really the gist of it. We're working through the decrease in service level scenarios, but happy to answer if there are any questions or so far. Anything else?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I like what you're doing, and I think the way that you're approaching it, I think it is excellent. And you're one of the relative minorities of our clients where you get kind of the trifecta, because I know you've been the lead in terms of building the simulation, but you've also had some participation from your communications PIO, as well as from Monica in your budget finance division. How has it been for you actually to build it? And often we don't get the executive office, the manager's office involved at this close of a way. How has it been for you to sort of manage all those sort of internal issues and to deal with the financial ones, but also be cognizant of the communications needs?
Yeah, I think that's, as I alluded, I think that was really because our community is, we're at a very pivotal point in our community. Traditionally, historically, we have done very well. We're a very lean organization compared to, if you were to say anything per capita basis in our county, whereas the community has felt that we have been good stewards. But in the last year or so, we have really seen an uptick in our community wanting to be a part of the city local government process, wanting to find out more, learn more. So it's a bit uncomfortable for some of us. So that's why I think the emphasis as far as getting the executive level office involved to making sure that if and when the product is rolled out, it serves its purpose. So we're involved in the sense of doing a little bit of a quality control and make sure the message is the key here, right? And what we're trying to accomplish. So in terms of setting up technically, I think it is very easy to set up. You could do it via import. You could also, quickly even hop on and do it live online. So I think from a technical standpoint and getting this up and running, importing the dollar amounts, the divisions, the categories is probably the least amount of work. But where I would emphasize spending majority of the time is adding in what we call, or in our organization, we're calling the blue eye, is the information for each of the categories. So that's really where the meat of your communication happens. So, and I think, Chris, you did a great job during the last webinar illustrating, being able to embed other softwares, portals into Balancing Act. So we're really excited to do that, and we're really looking at this as a digital budget book, if you will, right?
That's great. Another thing that we find, and it sounds like it's been your experience too, is we find budget directors in particular, but I think other staff, especially from the manager's office, would have the same concern. Is the concern that department directors might have, like, oh my gosh, do I really want the public weighing in on how many police officers we should have? Or, what does the public really know about how often parks should be maintained, that type of thing. And I think you're very smart in terms of how you're going about it, Harjo. What we found is a good way of sort of reducing that resistance is to use the tool internally or with small groups at first. And we've heard great reports from cities and counties across the country that if you kind of show these department heads that, it's not just an opportunity for people to slash and burn your budget, but there's actually an opportunity for people to learn about what your department does, learn the entirety of what you're doing. And in most instances, they agree that it's fair, that it's important stuff. And if there does need to be a cut, that there's actually some pain and resistance involved with that. And those of you who are charged with making these decisions usually get, a fair amount of empathy for it.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right on that, and that was heard very loud and clear when we went out to our we did a all staff meeting, just kind of talked about the tool, what the intention is, and I think one key thing that came out of it was that everybody was wanting to see the product, the finished product, before it's made live to the community. So here, actually, in the next 2 weeks, as we continue to refine this, we have a internal executive/leadership team where all the department heads are going to be able to come in and play around with the simulations, give their feedback, and then we'll go ahead and incorporate, hopefully, some good positive comments where we're able to enhance the simulation further before it goes live to the community. So I think there's definitely that interest, and I'm glad that we're headed that direction too.
Oh, that's great. Well, excellent work, and I think the way that you're going about this just makes a lot of sense, and we're here to support you as you go forward with this.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, so let's go back to our agenda for the day, the items that we wanted to work on. We're going to get to hear a little bit from Harjo and Morgan Hill. So I'm going to focus, most of the workshop part of today is going to be on building the taxpayer receipt. That's a much more popular feature, but I did want to just let you know and remind you that we've got two really nice features that we're just rolling out. And the first one I'm showing you is the impact feature. And I don't have a working demo of it right now. We're kind of retooling a few things on the back end. But I did want to just illustrate it for you. And I think I mentioned it during the first session. But what it allows you to do is to have multiple impacts. And so in this case, we've got the impact on the current year's budget on the left, which is the traditional way of presenting things. But then we also have another indicator over here. In this case, it's financial sustainability in 2030, so a long-term outlook. And so what this allows you to do is you can connect you can have basically two math equations that are associated with any action below. So one math action would be the impact on this current year deficit. The second one would be on this third indicator, and you can customize all of this, and you can actually even add a third or even a fourth indicator if you want. It's really nice the way that Dan, our senior software engineer, has designed this, and we're actually going to devote an entire a webinar to this probably in the next 4 weeks or so. So stay tuned for that if you want to learn more about it. The next one, and oh gosh, you know what? Sorry, it's doing something different here. It's going to a webinar, so I guess there was a webinar embedded there. Excuse me. The next one is our dedicated funds, and this one I am going to demonstrate for you. It's been really fun to see cities use this, especially if they're thinking about asking for a revenue increase. The old political wisdom is that if you're asking for an increase, you should tell people exactly what you're going to do with it. So I'm going to take you to our live demo, and this is our Anytown, and once again going through these opening modals where you can brand it as you wish, and then you can ask, we call them these entry questions, and you can ask people how satisfied they are with services, and then you hit continue. So the way that this works is that you can go to something like streets and transportation, and you see these new transportation projects. And so the question here is, should the city accelerate construction of new projects? And right now, no is the default. And then if you hover over it, it says this item is determined by the associated revenue source. So let's say that you tried to make a choice over here. Say that you wanted to choose yes. What happens is a new window opens up. This is a modal window, and it bridges the two sides. And so if you look kind of behind over here, you'll see that a revenue item has also opened up. And so it restates the question, should sales tax be increased in order to fund transportation projects? And right now we've got yes, but I'm going to choose no, just so we can kind of see what the two differences are. And it says, okay, the impact on the revenue side is that the sales tax will remain at a certain level. In this case, it's 2%. In terms of the impact of the spending, there'll be $0 new. And so the consequence of that is that the city is not keeping up with demand, and traffic delays are expected to increase. And if you take a look at what that means, is sort of a sad-looking picture of a pothole with a cone in it. So if your resident said, this is not the future that I want, that I would actually like to see something different there, what are my alternatives? If you say yes, the city sales tax increases to 2.3%. There's a small amount of money that's made available. Once again, this is just a fictional case. And then under the service item, it says that you'd pursue priority transportation projects. And under more details, I've just popped in a video of some workers working on some roads. This video I just got off of YouTube. It's the Colorado Department of Transportation. And then if you say I want to save that, you've then got over here on the revenue side, you've got this new tax, and it's got additional explanation of it if you want, and so forth. It's under consideration by council, and at least in places like California and Colorado, for a sales tax increase, this would have to be voted on by all residents. So once again, really important to have a broad buy-in. But in a lot of other states where there are tax expenditure limitations, particularly on property tax, there is often a need to have a voter approval as well for tax increases above a certain amount. So that's fairly common. So that's dedicated funds, and this one also it's not terribly difficult to set up, but I'll just be honest with you, it's one that we our clients don't use too often. So I'm not going to prioritize our time in this makers workshop to show you how to do it. We've got a video on it, and also for our current clients, we're glad to help you set it up. It just requires stitching a few things together. So you have to stitch your no together with your no over here and your yes together over here. It's really not too hard to associate it. It's just it takes a few minutes. I'm not going to take up our group time with that. All right. So moving on, let's go to taxpayer receipt. So taxpayer receipt, I'm going to take us to Denver for this. I don't think I mentioned this to you before, but the city of Denver, gosh, I thought I had it open. City of Denver taxpayer receipt was one of our first clients, and we worked with their CFO to come up with she had helped us to design the simulation, and after we had come up with the first version of the simulation, she said, the other thing I'd like to have is I'd like to have a way to demonstrate to residents the value they're getting for the tax dollars. So the rap against government is that they waste money and who knows where my tax dollars go and so forth. And she wanted a way of showing people that, and she wanted it to be better than just slicing the dollar bill and saying 12% goes to roads, 9% goes to Parks and Rec. She wanted something to be a little bit more about the person. And the example she gave that sort of helped us to think about why we should do this and how we should do this. She said that she used to love to go around to community groups in Denver, to chambers and to civic groups and rotaries and so forth. And she would often ask them, how much do you think the average Denver resident pays for snow removal each year? And the responses usually came in at about $200. And so she would let them get it completely wrong. And then she would say, $12.50. How's that for a deal? And so she wanted a way to not just show people how much money goes to each thing, but to show them how much of their tax dollars goes to each thing, so that people can really see what the value is. And so we worked with an economist at Colorado State University to come up with some ways of estimating an individual's revenue. So the most difficult one is sales tax, because that's something that we typically don't track. It's something that you pay at the cash register. But we came up with a way of using the Consumer Expenditure Survey and using a lookup to, based on somebody's income and their age, to come up with an approximation of how much money they spend on taxable items. So I'll just start by putting in some income here. I'll put in $55,000. And then I'll put in the age of, say, 45. And so what this is doing is saying somebody who has $55,000 worth of income has X amount of disposable income to buy goods and services with. And then a 45-year-old buys a certain market basket of goods, some of which are sales taxable and some of which are not. So an example would be a 45-year-old would buy a lot of items that have a sales tax, consumer items, all sorts of things. Whereas my 90-year-old father buys almost nothing but healthcare services. And so he pays for services that do not have a sales tax applied. And so it's not perfect, but it's a pretty good guesstimate. It gives you a way of sort of estimating how much somebody's paying, how much somebody spends on taxable items. Then we multiply that times the tax rate that is attributable to the local government sponsoring the taxpayer fee. So in a lot of places in Colorado, it's 2.5, 3.5%, something like that. It's not what people pay at the cash register, which is usually more like 7 or 8%. It's only the part that's attributable to the local government, because you're giving them a tax receipt for the taxes that they pay to your local government and not all the taxes they pay. And I think it's important to be accountable only for the things that you're in charge of. And then secondarily, we have some additional types of income. So I'm going to show you property tax here. Oh, sorry, I've got one more item here. And then this actually was a suggestion from a client to say, well, and she's a suburban, it was assistant city manager of a suburban city where the boundaries are pretty fungible and you can go across the county lines to the Home Depot. And if somebody buys something at Home Depot across the city line, none of that comes to their home city. So she said, could we do an approximation of how much somebody actually spends in our local jurisdiction? So we'll presume that somebody does most of their shopping close to home. So I'll put in 80%. And then down here, it says you own a home. So this is a way of getting a sense of property taxes. And so if we say yes, it asks this question. This is customizable. So Denver wanted to do actual value. Most of our clients do assessed value, but it's really completely up to you in terms of what you want to do. And then over here, you can click on the link here, and it'll take you to the assessor's website. And if you, in pretty short order, you can type in your address and get your actual value, your market value, your assessed value, whatever it is. And so I'm going to put in, since they're using actual value, which is close to market value, I'm going to put in the median home price in Denver, which is very expensive these days, $400,000. And then we're going to take a look at the tax receipt. And so we wanted it to kind of look like a Home Depot bill. And so it's got affordable housing, $19.42. Capital projects, $389. And each of these gets the explanation. The same as on Balancing Act, the spending side, the same explanations show up here. So this was a special bill that voters passed, very significant one. And this shows what the GO bond, the general obligation bond, is paying for. And if they would have wanted, they could have listed out even more details on this. These are a little bit different because these were funded by bonds, a lot of these, but you get down a little bit lower and you get more things that are kind of general fund. And I love this one because a lot of people say, well, if we just didn't pay the mayor and the city council so much, we'd have tons of money. In this case, the mayor, this is the entire mayor's office, not just the mayor, but all the mayor's staff, is taking 97 cents from that fictitious but unrealistic person that we just estimated taxes for. This is the one that I like the most, Parks and Recreation and Culture. My father worked in the Parks and Rec department for 31 years. $12.08 gets you access to 27 rec centers, 29 pools, and 10 rec programs. And then you can kind of scroll down, 911, et cetera. And then down here, you see the total obligation. This is a little bit higher than most places because Denver is both a city and a county. You see what the total tax obligation is. It's payable to the city and county of Denver. And then you can get a breakdown here that shows you how much of it was sales tax and how much of it was property tax. So we think this is actually a really nice thing to do, a nice way for to illustrate that people are getting good value for the tax dollar. And so the challenge was making it work for all these different revenue sources. The spending side we've already handled conceptually with balancing act simulation. We've got a really robust editor for that we've talked about in previous sessions. The challenge was estimating revenue. And so we've got three types of revenue that we can estimate right off the top of the bat. We've got, as I've shown you, we've got sales tax, property tax, and income tax. A lot of local governments, especially on the eastern part of the U.S., actually have a local government income tax. And me being from the West, that was a little bit interesting to learn. And then we can do some specials. But those are the three that we have out of the box. We can also do like a vehicle tax. We can, Ohio has some very sort of strange, unusual interactions between where someone lives and where somebody works. And we've kind of worked those kinks out, but you have to, if you're doing anything beyond sales, property, or income tax, you just need to get us involved. We've seen most of the different permutations, so we kind of have a pathway forward, and it's not too hard. But if you have revenue sources beyond those three, just we'll work with you to set yours up for you. Okay, so I'm on my dashboard on my client management area that we've been looking at before. Now I'm going down to this tab for taxpayer receipt. I'm going to say create taxpayer receipt. And so I'm going to just call this demo for makers session. And then just like on the simulation, I can choose my language. We don't have as many languages in taxpayer receipt, but we've got English and Spanish, which are the main ones that are needed in North America. It's not too hard to add one if anybody wanted to work with us on that. So I'm going to start from scratch, and then I'm going to continue. And I'm going to pull in that same file. I'm going to use the same exact file that we used last week when or 2 weeks ago, I think it was, when we first uploaded our spending items for the simulation. I'm going to go to spending item first, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that in. And spending for Anytown, pulls it in. I can go in here and edit. So say that I wanted to have something different than what was in the spreadsheet or what I have in the simulation. You just edit in the same way that you do on the simulation. Very easy to do. But let's go to revenue. That's where the new stuff is. So I can choose which of these types of property taxes that I want. And like I said, this blue warning down here says, you know what, we've got a lot of different ways of doing this. These are the three most common for local government. Let us know if you need something else. So let's go ahead and we can just do one of each of these. So we'll do property tax first. And so you get a little wizard here. So this blank over here, this corresponds with this item over here. So we're going to just go ahead and say, we'll use assessed value. What is the assessed value of your primary residence? And so that's just letting people that we're using assessed value as opposed to actual or market value. And down here, it's got a little explanation down here about how you determine what your multiplier would be. In this case, I want it to be 80 mils, so I think I do 0.008 to get to 80 mils. And then I get the option down here to add the assessor's office. And so you can customize whatever you want this to say. And we're just going to say, please look up your assessed value on this website. And so I'm going to go over here and I'm going to grab that link, copy, and then I'll just go ahead and add it here. I'm going to save. And then we'll go to income tax, and well, let's just do income taxes are usually pretty small for local government. Let's just do 1%. And then, and this actually doesn't require an additional question because it uses the same one that it uses for the sales tax. If you don't use the sales tax, it includes this one, but not the what is your age and what percentage of shopping do you do in town. And then we'll go to sales tax, which is the most complicated, but it's really not too bad. So once again, put in the rate. Don't put in the rate that people pay at the cash register, because then you'll be taking responsibility for every other sales tax that people pay, whether it's to special districts or to the state or whoever. So, good example in Colorado is about 2.5, maybe 3% for a sales tax. We'll put that in. And then this is where you get to choose. If you want, you can, that question I mentioned before where we talked about what percentage of your shopping for goods and services you do within the locality. If you don't want to ask that, if you just want to keep this as simple as possible, you just unclick that. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it. Most clients do. And then, as I said, if you've got a vehicle tax, or you've got a restaurant tax or something like that, we've got ways of estimating that. Just contact us. Okay, so then I'm going to go check my settings just to make sure that I've filled out everything else I want to have. So I'm going to confirm I want English. You can change the introductory text. So I'm just going to leave it at answer a few questions to estimate how much you paid. This is the call to action. So down here, view your tax receipt. Some people have wanted this to say view your estimated tax receipt. There's a lot of nuance. We realize view your estimated tax receipt. That's fine. You can just change it that easily. This is the about text, so it shows up on the upper right. And this is where I would encourage you to say, this receipt only reflects revenues collected by and spent by the city. And you could probably wordsmith that a little bit better, but I won't worry about it right now. And then down here, the call to action. So you can send people to various places down here. Instead of you can send people to Balancing Act. You can send people to your home page, your finance page, etc. I'm just going to leave all that for now. And then down at the bottom, typically we send people over from the tax receipt. We send them right over to the simulation, and you can have people go back and forth so that the two can be mutually reinforcing to each other. But if you want to send someplace else, you want to send them to, a city council's website or to your budget book, whatever you want to do. You just type in the text there, and then you put in the call to action. By default, if you don't put anything there, this is what shows up, and it links to the most recently activated budget. And then down here, you can uncheck this if you want, but most people will leave it checked, where it just shows the breakdown by the different type of taxes that you're including. So now I think I've got everything built here. Let's go ahead and preview this. And so I should have given it a better name for this, but want a receipt for your demo for maker session taxes. I could have put in any town. If I should have put in any town. I've got my about up here that's got a few statements on it. This receipt only reflects revenues collected and spendable by the city. I've answered a few questions to estimate how much you paid. What's your annual income? I'll put in $55,000 again. For age, I'll put in 45. What percentage for goods and products do you do within the locality? I just like that 80% number. That seems reasonable. And then do you own a home? So you've got what is the assessed value of your primary residence. So I'm not going to do the 400,000 because that was an actual value. I'm going to use what would be typical for a suburb of Denver, like Wheat Ridge, Colorado, for example. I think their typical assessed value is about 30,000. So I'm going to put that in. And now let's take a look at the receipt. And I think they should be I think I've used typical reasonable figures, and it looks like I have. So that person that we just, whose info we just entered, including the income tax, which if we were doing Wheat Ridge, Colorado, that actually would not be the case. So this is coming up a little bit high, but $445 for police, operations, $320. This is how it break down. Remember, this was that short one that simple file. So this really isn't too typical of a breakdown. The one for Denver that I showed you a few minutes ago is quite a bit more typical. But it just kind of shows how it breaks down, and then it shows you what the breakdown here is. And I'm not sure, this is supposed to go to my most recently activated simulation. I'm not sure which one that is, but anyway, I'll just for demonstration purposes, I'll show that to you. Yeah, so anyway, that's that. So that's taxpayer receipt. I'm going to pause there just to see if anybody has any questions about this. One thing that makes it different than just saying, like sometimes people have a picture of a dollar and they chop it up and they say 9%, et cetera, goes to this. what's different about this one is that people can actually do a reasonably good estimate of the taxes they pay. And we think that that's useful and makes it more personal and certainly gets a lot more attention. So I'm not seeing any questions, but all right, I'll just assume that there are not any, and I will go back to the presentation. Okay, so now we're kind of in the home stretch now, and this is one of my favorite parts, and I'll just tell you it's one of the most neglected parts, especially when the lead agency that does the simulation and does the taxpayer receipt is the budget finance side. Budget finance side, by definition, their core competency is being excellent at doing budgeting and finance, and it's often performance and all sorts of analytics and things like that. And sometimes the budget person and the finance person is terrific at communications. Sometimes not. But just as I was very interested with Harjo, so in Morgan Hill, it is sort of atypical that our lead person, our point of contact, or the simulation maker for a city, would be in the city manager's office. We do have a few instances where there's an assistant city manager, an assistant to the city manager who builds it, and that actually works pretty well. And I think it works well because they've got a perspective on the entire organization. But that's not usually the case. And so what we found is that the best teams are when there's a lead, because there's a lot of content, and you want your simulation to be accurate and to convey the 3 C's: constraints, context, and consequences. But there's also I think a lot of benefit in having a communicator's perspective, and sometimes communicators can sort of read through it just for like real language checking. It's like, gosh, if you say FTE, you're gonna not be communicating with half of the residents because they're not going to know what that is, or they might suggest that if you make a certain type of statement about a service level, that may not resonate with people, and they may suggest instead that instead of talking about how many FTE might be added to the library, instead you talk about what that might get people. It might, like an extra hour of being open and so forth. So really, as I said, involving the communications folks with the budget folks is I think key. And also I think about both taxpayer receipt, but especially the simulation. It's really a facilitation tool for budgets. Budgets are enormously hard things to talk about. And so, and communicators have been trying, I think, for a while to figure out, what is the way in having to engaging residents to think about this most important policy issue, and it's hard. And so, Balancing Act provides, I think, that opportunity for people to learn about what a lot of people consider to be the most important policy document of government, the budget. So, one thing I'd like to the overall headline here is that when you offer budget participation as opposed to here's the budget, invariably, we've seen that you get positive media, and there's all sorts of media out there, for better or for worse. So there's tons of different types of media. I'm going to give you some examples of each. So most of you probably have really good capacity right now to do direct communication with your residents. You probably got a terrific email list of, good thousands probably for the larger of you, maybe tens of thousands even for the very larger of you. Sometimes we've seen some good success with the utility bill insert. I've got an example of that, really kind of a fun one. Traditional media, TV, radio, newspaper, I'll show you a couple examples of those. Social media, events, branded campaign. That's what I'm going to show you for the next few minutes here. And then we'll take a little bit of a breather and see if you have any questions on anything we've talked about. All right, so this is from the city of Charlottesville, and we just love this. They created this little insert to go into their utility bill, and they invited people to come and provide some input on their budget. And oh my gosh, I think they had about 2,000 users in a town of about 30,000. It was really remarkable. And so that was fun to see what they did. And they were kind of creative. Honestly, I think they got just a little bit of a stock photo, and they, thought that this looked pretty good. And they kind of ripped off of the name of our company, Balancing Act, but we certainly didn't mind. And they checked with us, and we gave them a logo, and we thought it was great. But obviously balancing, the idea of balance, it fits within the budget, but it's not the only concept. We certainly want you to feel free to do whatever you think works for you. This is from I think it's the Quincy Herald-Whig in Illinois, and the sponsor of the budget there is actually an elected official, City Treasurer Linda Moore, and she's been great to work with. She just thought that this was an important thing for her town to learn about and to increase accountability and participation, and she was rewarded with a lot of plaudits from her coworkers and others at the city and other elected officials and other professional staff. And then the media also did some really nice publicity. Interestingly enough, maybe it's because we don't typically work with elected officials as kind of the lead sponsor, but she actually went out and got like some small grants and like some in-kind donations and maybe even some small dollar amounts from a community bank to the Mercantile Bank. It's down here to donate space, and I think they donated refreshments and things like that. So it wasn't an awful lot of money, but it's just sort of a nice way to maybe bring a business community, part of the business community, into having this conversation. I hesitate to show this to you because TV is sort of a tough thing to get, but our clients have had amazing success getting incredibly good TV, whether it's in a big place like Pittsburgh or the Washington D.C. media market. Montgomery County, the big county to the north of Washington D.C., got on local TV there. In this one on the left, and we'll share this deck with you. The Mayor Peduto was on there, and he was just saying, gosh, we really want to, be providing high value services to you. Please, use balancing act simulation to help us, make the best budget possible. City of Pittsburgh also, they have both a capital budget and an operating budget simulation. And then he really liked, as an elected official, the taxpayer receipt. And so this clip has him and then his budget director talking about what they did and why they did, and they've had really good success. Shifting to a small community, Lynchburg, Virginia, these guys actually had two different TV stations doing, I think, 3 stories. They did 3 stories between two TV stations. Really nice, just sort of saying the city is really trying to use your tax dollars wisely and really wants to use them in the most effective way, and so please come and participate. So even though TV, I know it's elusive, especially for smaller jurisdictions and jurisdictions where it's a crowded media market, but we've actually seen our clients have some really good success, especially if you're among the first in your region to do balancing act. Radio has been a good one. These are just a couple of them. The one on the left here is Syracuse City Schools. Really nice radio story there. Featured their CFO. The one on the right is Dane County, and that was nice as well. Social media, we've had all sorts of social media. It's been actually really fun to see how people use it. On the left is the city of Stillwater, and they're kind of saying, we are here. They've got their budget cycle, and we want your input. Over here is Kansas City. Kansas City comes up a lot, as they point out here. They were one of the first cities to use the budgeting tool, and so they're quite proud of that. And so you can see how they are advertising it. If any of you have looked at Kansas City's recently, they have actually done a revamp of theirs in just the last week or so, and it's been really fun to see what they're doing with it. They've kind of taken it to the next level. This one is a meme. We actually created it ourselves, and we've supplied it to a couple of different customers. But it's kind of a fun one. It's meant to the shape of it is meant to be shaped on or to be shared on Facebook. And so let's see if I can make this go for you. I hope that it'll transmit. So you can see the dog moving, and you can see the dog making selections, and he is interested in spending $1 billion to turn the whole city into a dog park. So if dogs were mayors, that's what they would do. The next one is, and this one, it's surprising how successful these are. This is Mayor Bryce Ward, who is the mayor of the borough of Fairbanks, Alaska. Fairbanks, Alaska, the local governments and the school districts are really experiencing some tough times because of the cost of energy is reducing revenue sharing from the state, and so they're having some tough times, and they want to engage residents to think. Some of our best implementations are actually in Alaska right now, with Fairbanks and a couple of school districts that are really using it in some positive ways. Oops, I think it might be opening it. Let's see. I'm not sure if it'll play or not for you. Let's see. Is it? Well, you can see it. It's just a simple video. It's a talking head, but we've seen success with this a number of times. I'm not going to keep it going because I don't think you can hear the sound. Okay, so the next one, and this is like ripped from the headlines. This was at a meeting I went to last night. So we're based in the Denver area. and there's a suburban school district called Cherry Creek Schools. It's a pretty big school district. I think they've got about 60,000, 55, 60,000. And they're projecting in 2 years that they are going to make some, they're going to need to make some dramatic decreases in service unless they can get voters to approve a mill levy override, an increase in the property tax. And they're aware that residents are often reluctant to increase taxes. That's sort of the case everywhere. And so they're going through this process to really get people involved and educated in what's going on and what it would mean for the district if no new revenue were found. They're getting people to think about efficiencies. And the way that they designed it is that this is a huge auditorium. There were 400 people there. The superintendent and the school board member and a parent co-chair of the budget task force and the president of the teachers union all gave presentations about sort of, the aspiration for excellence, how they've been accountable for taxpayer dollars and sort of what they project. And it was really interesting. You can see people are sort of glued to this. I mean, you don't often find people in a big auditorium evening meeting that are paying such close attention, but they were glued to this presentation. And then after the presentation, they had people go into to classrooms. They held this in a high school, and they had 20 of these classrooms, and they had, I think, a teacher or maybe this is a principal or something like that as a facilitator. And as you can see on the screen here, they had balancing act. And it was just this fascinating exercise, and the conversation around it was really interesting. And they talked about big things. They talked about both what they can do as a district. They also talked about a level of advocacy to make a bigger case to the state for a larger share of state funding for education. We're seeing other jurisdictions like Milwaukee County are doing the same thing. They're in Milwaukee County's case, they're not asking for more state aid. They're asking the state for the authority to levy a sales tax. But it's just really interesting to see how closely people can pay attention, and how the simulation, just as Hajar was saying, how the simulation can really make something understandable that hadn't been understandable before, and can hold people's attention, and we think help them to make the right decisions for their communities. This next one, I'll just say up here, this is our branded campaigns, and just because I went to Cherry Creek last night, this is theirs. They're calling it Cherry Creek Future Forward, and it's a really interesting effort and very thoughtful, and one that I think will be written about in case studies, because I think that a lot of people can learn from it. Then this other one over here is from one of the nation's largest cities. It's Fund Phoenix, and they've created Fund PHX. And if you want to take a look at it, it's easy to Google. They've got what I think is one of the best budget explainer videos here, and you just click on it, and it talks about a variety of things that they're doing, including how they've set up their version of Balancing Act, and this tab over here takes you right to the tool. So we've seen a lot of good success with this. This might be beyond the capacity for a lot of local governments that may not have a large communication staff, but you don't have to do it the same way that Phoenix did. I mean, Cherry Creek, I don't think that they have a huge staff allocation towards this, but they just want to have some cohesive conversation about what it is that we want to be able to provide to residents and how to pay for it. Roseville, California did engage Roseville. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways that don't have to be terribly complicated that you can do this. But once again, having the simulation tool, sort of augments those communication needs in a way that previously wasn't really possible. We are at the end of what's been a pretty comprehensive 3 hours here, almost 3 hours of time with me talking. So first, I'm going to thank you all for listening and indulging, and it's terrific to see so many people and entities across North America that are interested in this. And I guess before we go, we'll just see if there's any questions or comments or statements, and you can use the question feature on GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, or you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or whatever you want. All right, I'm going to assume that no one wants to say anything. If you have questions or comments, please contact either me or Peter, and we'll be in contact soon with you. We'll send some links out to the videos if you don't have them already, and we'll also share some other resources like the PowerPoint presentations that I've got. And if you haven't already, please feel free to create a trial account or contact us and we'll give you a one-on-one demo. The most fun thing I think about Balancing Act is actually trying it for yourself if you're a person who's so inclined. And we see this as a really creative tool, and we look forward to seeing how you use it and how you want to go forward with it. And we will help provide sort of experience and expertise and software to to help you and your community meet your goals and figure out how to raise and allocate resources in a way that's most reflective of your community. So seeing no comments that are waiting to be made, I'll just go ahead and say goodbye to everybody and thank you very much. Bye.